Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Azim Khan, story scholar at the 1947 Partition Archive and a South Asian Studies lecturer. It is my pleasure to be your host today. Welcome to the 75 Days of Partition series. This is day 74 of hosting esteemed guests, which will continue till August 17th. Today, it is an honor to welcome the first speaker of today's series, journalist Subir Bhaumik. Mr. Bhaumik is a veteran BBC journalist and analyst of Eastern and Northeastern India. He writes columns for many Indian and overseas publications. His work focuses on eastern part of India, and today we will hear in great detail about it. Thank you for joining us, Shubhi.
Thanks.
How are you today?
I'm fine.
Okay,
Having
let's
some
dive
trouble
straight
with
in.
technology, but otherwise fine.
Yes, and our apologies for the technological issues. Um, let's just jump straight into the questions. Please tell us how your interest in partition developed.
Well, I'm a boy of the border. My roots are in East Bengal, which is now Bangladesh, used to be East Pakistan. My family, hails from Communal district of what is today's Bangladesh. But my grandfather moved to the princely kingdom of Tripura to work as in the police of the Maharaja. And our families were between some part of the family was in Agartala, which is Tripura, and part of the family was in Kumilla. And when partition happened, some of those who were left in Kumilla moved to Tripura, because I must clarify here that the Tripura king was the sovereign in what is today's Tripura. But in an adjoining districts of East Bengal in Kumilla, he also owned lands. He was not the sovereign. He owned the lands and he was paying taxes to the British. But my family hails from that area called Chakla Roshanabad, which was a property of the king of Tripura. So for a lot of our people, Bengalis, there, moving to Tripura was a natural option when the partition happened. They thought that they are moving from one part of the kingdom to another. For them, we are all Maharaja's people. So today I am here, tomorrow I am there, that kind of thing. My grandfather went to Tripura to serve the king in 1910. That was 37 years before the partition. And he was well set there, and everything was fine. When partition happened, before the partition, my father actually joined the Indian Air Force, and his first posting was in Lahore, from one corner of what was then British India to the another corner. He was posted in Walton Air Base in Lahore. So that's how it was in 1947. And because I I have not seen 47. I was born in 56, but I was definitely interest. Just a moment. Sorry. So
It's okay.
so I have seen 1971, and therefore, for me, 47 and 47 and 71 are linked. For 71, you may say, is an abnegation of 1947, because our boys in the fields of East Bengal, in a way, they did undid the partition. In 1947, the line of that divided people was religion. In 1971, religion could not hold Pakistan together. And as a boy from Agartala, I've seen all this very close. Bangladesh is next door. This was the surge of Bengali nationalism led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and that led to the breakup of Pakistan. Uh, but 47 was different, and we can talk about that. Hello.
Sorry, apologies for my mic was muted. So you've written extensively about the political situation in Tripura in 1947 and the effects it had on the politics of the state, even to this day. Please elaborate on that.
Well, actually, in 1947, Tripura was a princely kingdom, like many other princely kingdoms in India, like Kashmir, like Junagadh, like Hyderabad. So the choice of joining either India or Pakistan was left to the royal family of Tripura. At that moment, Tripura did not have King Veer Vikram. He had just died, and his son, who was supposed to be the king, was a minor. So the administration of the royal kingdom of Tripura was handled by Regent Maharani Kanchan Prabha Devi. There was enormous pressure on her from a party called Anjuman-e Islamia, which was close to the Muslim League, and it was headed by a very rich Muslim businessman in Tripura, Abdul Barik, who was known as Gedu Mia. He had made a lot of money during the Second World War as a contractor, as a defense contractor. He was the man who built the Agartala airport, which has become a big airport now. And therefore, Mr. Gedu Mia was very keen to actually win over the nobles in the court of Tripura and ensure that Tripura joined Pakistan. Now, why they were emboldened? Obviously, Tripura is not a Muslim majority area. But that was also not the case with an adjoining area called Chittagong Hill Tracts, where 97% of the population was Buddhists and Hindus. They were not, any Muslims there of worth it. But Chittagong Hill Tracts was given over by Cyril Ratcliffe to Pakistan. And the local people objected to it. Even today, they don't want to be in Bangladesh. They want to be part of India, but a lot of them. Therefore, but Pakistan took it over, and the Indian leaders did not make much of an attempt, to bring Chittagong Hill Tracts into Pakistan. That would have given the northeastern region a sea access. But anyway, that's a different story. The point is that people like Gedu Mia and others were emboldened to try to take Tripura into Pakistan using their influence, buying off some nobles in the court. But Queen Kanchan Prabha Devi, along with the local communists and the Congress party, both the communists and the Congress were extremely active in the state politics, though it was a royal kingdom. They pushed the queen, and finally the queen went and met Sardar Patel, and finally Tripura acceded to the Indian Union. But Azim Sab, it happened 2 years after 1947. Tripura joined Indian Union, signing the Instrument of Accession only on 15th October 1949. So between 1947 and 1949, there was extensive palace conspiracies, a group of nobles trying to, take Tripura into Pakistan, another group of nobles and the local political parties pitching for joining India. Some people, some tribal leaders were even suggesting that Tripura should become independent, Shadhin Tripura as they call it. All kinds of things were happening. And 2 years, and in these 2 years, between 1947 and 1949, taking advantage of the unstable condition, the almost collapse of the royal administration, the Communist Party started a tribal rebellion. They were for asking for, tribal rights and protection of tribal land. Also, since 1947 happened, Tripura was already witnessing a huge flood of Bengali Hindu refugees from across the border. So between 1947 and 1949, Tripura was facing the huge wave of partition refugees coming in. Obviously, this was upsetting the tribals. They thought their demography was under challenge. Numbers do count, and especially in a democracy, you understand. So, and there was this attempt by different groups of people to take, push Tripura to join Pakistan, which obviously local people did not want. But a group of nobles conspired with Anjuman-e Islamia. They were trying to do that. The Muslim League was active. And the local Congress and Communist parties backed the Queen, Kanchan Prabha Devi. So finally, 2 years and 3 months after the partition, after August 15th, 1947, on 15th October 1949, Tripura finally joined the Indian Union. And, that's how Tripura became a part of the Indian Union.
So, in amongst all of this, to put it in a certain way, Game of Thrones that was happening, were the stakeholders in the state actually consulted with regards to where they want to go during partition?
Well, the Queen actually, there was no formal referendum. Okay. And the electoral system was not yet in place. But the Queen did consult the two major political parties which were active in the state. That is the Indian National Congress, which was led by a gentleman who was finally the chief minister of Tripura, the first chief minister, Sachindra Lal Singh. He belonged to a family of Bengali revolutionaries who had unfurled the rebellion, armed rebellion in Chittagong, neighboring Chittagong, in 1930s. You must have heard of it, Surjo Sen, the Chittagong armory raid and all that. Now, one of the heroes of that Chittagong rebellion, which has been made into a film, and Abhishek Bachchan, etc., had played their role in that. One of them was Ananta Singh. And Sachindra Lal Singh was the nephew of Ananta Singh, one of the heroes of the Chittagong uprising. So he was the first chief minister of Tripura. He was leading the Congress in Tripura, and there was the Communist Party. Communist Party was led by a legendary tribal leader who later became chief minister. He represented the Communist Party in the Indian Parliament 3 times, Dasharath Dev Burman, and Viren Datta. These are the people who were leading the political activities in Tripura. They were strongly in support of joining the Indian Union, and they actually advised the Queen, and the Queen was actually taking their advice. King Maharaja Kirit Vikram was a minor, so there was nothing that he could do. There were a group of nobles led by a man called Durjoy Korta, who was very close to Anjuman-e-Islamiya's founder Abdul Barik. So they were obviously trying to take Tripura into, and they were saying if Chittagong Hill Tracts, being a 97% Buddhist and Hindu area, could join, Pakistan, there was nothing wrong with Tripura joining Pakistan. But then the local people, by and large, and I know it from my family and others, they were obviously against it. On this issue, the majority population of Tripura are Bengali Hindus and tribals. Both were against joining Pakistan. And their leaders, their political leaders who later represented them, who became MPs and who later led state governments, both S.L. Singh, Dasharath Dev, Viren Datta, the Communists, the Congress, they were totally in support of joining the Indian Union. And on their advice, Kanchan Prabha Devi went and met Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel and negotiated for a while before Tripura and also Manipur. Manipur also joined the Indian Union around the same time. Now, Manipur, the people say that there was an element of force which was used, a certain amount of arm twisting by Mr. Patel and the Indian government. But in Tripura, the Queen, as well as the two major political parties, were in support of joining the Indian Union. So that's how it happened.
And also, you extensively and forensically analyze the effects of partition on Tripura and the neighboring states, and you contend that the fabric of society was forever torn apart by that. Could you please tell us more about that?
Azim Saab, the thing is that, when Tripura was a royal kingdom, the kings of Tripura, especially Maharaja Bir Vikram and his father, they were famous for ethnic balance. They looked after the interests of the tribals, who were the indigenous tribals, but they also, were very encouraging. They were also very kind to the Bengalis who went there. You have to understand that when the official language of British Bengal was English, the court language, the official language of Tripura was Bengali. The kings of Tripura were very friendly with Rabindranath Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore has written some of his very famous works, based on Tripura, like Rajoshri and all this. So Tagore was not only a friend, he also advised the kings of Tripura on matters of revenue, because Tagore himself was a zamindar and he knew a thing or two about revenues. So there was a strong Bengali cultural influence there. Also, you have to understand that Tripura, the kingdom of Tripura has traditionally extended into districts of East Bengal in the past. One of the great kings of Tripura, Vijay Manikya, is said to have taken bath in 7 rivers of East Bengal. So the kings of Tripura always had a tradition of a huge amount of Bengali subjects. Having said that, what is Tripura today? Not the ancient kingdom of Tripura, which was much bigger, but Hill Tripura, as it was called by the British, was a primarily populated by indigenous tribes people, the Tripuris, the Halams, the Riangs, who are Mongoloid tribals. And they were in majority, not a very decisive majority, but a 60% majority. Because the Tripura kings had taken two types of Bengalis to Tripura. Number one, they took a lot of Bengali Hindus, particularly professionals, to run their administration, doctors, professors, administrators, accountants. They also brought in a lot of Bengali Muslim and lower caste, scheduled caste peasants to till the lands. Why? Because the tribals were shifting cultivators, they did not give much revenue to the kings. So the kings wanted settled agriculture and they brought these East Bengali peasants, both Muslims and lower caste Hindus, to Tripura, and they gave them jungle avadi leases, which means you clear a part of the jungle, this is yours. We will give you patta, we will give you land rights. And that's how a lot of Bengali farmers were settled in Tripura way before partition, my family included. My grandfather went to work there as a police officer. He, for performing some acts of bravery, he got a decently big slice of land, and this was a direct grant from the king. We still cultivate that land, and my brothers are still looking after. We have a rubber plantation there and that kind of thing. The point is, before partition, the tribals were not so upset. The tribals looked at these Bengali peasants who had come, as someone from whom they could pick up a more modern form of agriculture, which is not slash and burn. You plant something in the hills today here, clear it, go to some other patch. You go for settled agriculture. Now, when you go for settled agriculture, that's when the kings can come. The government can come and take revenue from you. This is the size of your land, this much revenue. So the kings had a vested interest in bringing in Bengali cultivators to popularize settled wet rice agriculture so that they could augment their revenues. Now, the point is that the tribals, till such time, the number of Bengalis who had come in was reasonable, and the tribals were still in a majority. They looked at these people as someone from whom they could learn agriculture. They could, they were seen as friends, like my family, with very good relations with tribals. But when the trickle turned into a tide after the partition, and when thousands and thousands of Bengali refugees fled into Tripura, looking for, to escape, from Pakistan, and suddenly their numbers started to grow, that is when the tribals started becoming jittery. And also, why? If Tripura had remained a royal kingdom with a king who belonged to their own ethnicity, there would not be a problem. It's a bit like Bhutan. When the king is from their own tribe, the Bhutanese are not afraid. But they are afraid of incoming Nepalese because they think it may become another Sikkim. Numbers will count. Why these tribals started becoming upset? Because Tripura, with the end of monarchy and the onset of Indian-style ballot box democracy, where numbers count, they were definitely apprehensive of the numbers. Now, today, if Tamilians become 60% or 70% of the population of UP, you mean to say the Thakur Sahibs there will keep quiet? They will not. It's very simple as that. So, the same thing happened here. And therefore, after the Bengalis became a majority population and became a decisive majority in 20 years after partition, the ethnic relations began to, deteriorate, and increasing number of increasing intensity of conflict between the Bengali settlers and the tribals. Initially, there was no problem, but slowly, as the numbers game changed, the demography changed. Things deteriorated in Tripura, and finally, we had to look at the riots of 1980, where a lot of people were killed, and then a long bout of ethnic insurgency, which still the embers are still flickering. So and now there is a separate demand for a tribal state, spearheaded by the son of the former Maharaja. So you have a lot of complications in the state politics now, owing to the complicated ethnic demographic divide. But it all started with the partition, because the numbers changed suddenly. And the very character of Tripura as a state of ethnic tribesmen changed. Tripura today is the only state in Northeast where indigenous ethnicities are not in majority. It's the majority in Tripura are the Bengalis. And that somehow causes a lot of heartburn, understandably so. Why not? And also because this has a bearing on political power. It has a bearing on economy, meaning that a lot of tribals have lost out their land alienation is a serious problem. A lot of tribals lost out to the Bengali peasants their land in terms of normal competition, because the Bengali East Bengali farmer is a very tough farmer. He's a very tough cultivator. He can survive cyclones, he can survive floods, and he can still grow a very decent crop and make a profit. The tribals really can't match him. Even the Assamese can't match him in this kind of agrarian competition. So land changed hands. And land, Azim Saab, is not just an economic resource, which it is. It's also the symbol of the collective. So a lot of tribals thought they have become foreigners in their own land, and it had a bearing on political power, which is why they thought, oh, we had our king. Today we don't control political power. The majority of the lawmakers in the Tripura State Assembly are Bengalis. The chief ministers are Bengalis. So we are nowhere. We have lost power. So, that is how the psychology has panned out. That's how the history has panned out. It all starts with partition, because prior to partition also there were a lot of Bengalis there. But Tripura had no history of ethnic conflict. On the other hand, Tripura had a history of tribal revolts against the king. When the king wanted a lot of tax, the Riangs revolted, the Jamatias revolted, the tribes revolted against the kings. But they did not fight with the Bengalis because the Bengali numbers were small. But when the numbers became big and decisive and Bengalis became a majority, obviously the local tribesmen did not like it, and fair enough. So that's how it happened.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating with regards to the multifaceted nature of partition, and I mean we can't just look at it in an all-encompassing broad way. For example, one question that arises from this is because so what you're basically saying is in Tripura basically democracy failed the state in a way that monarchy didn't, while we tend to hold the view 100% that democracy is always better than a monarchy. Would I be correct in saying
Democracy
that?
can never be good unless you command the numbers. Democracy is a game of numbers. It's a game where 51 people will rule over 49 other people. It's a game of numbers. So, democracy generally always makes smaller populations insecure. And especially in a place where the tribals were in a majority and suddenly they started losing it, and with the loss of numbers came the loss of both land and political power. So it has an economic as well as a political impact. It actually severely impacts on the psyche. And therefore, I would say that the monarchs of Tripura, now look at this. In 1940s, King Bir Vikram was a very, very enlightened monarch, enforced the tribal reserve. The tribal reserve is the precursor of the present tribal autonomous district council. So he created a tribal reserve over an area where the tribals were in decisive majority, and in those areas nobody else could buy land, so that the tribal lands and their hold over their land was protected. At the same time, when there were riots in neighboring East Bengal in places like Noakhali, Raipura, the king himself went with his army and rescued Bengali refugees, Hindus, and brought them into Tripura and settled them in certain areas. And nobody really raised a question, because they thought that the king is there. The tribals thought our king is there, and we don't have any reason to worry because political power lies with them and we'll get justice. Then suddenly the monarchy comes to an end and Indian style ballot box democracy comes in. And over a period of time, let me draw your attention to this. Because the Communist Party was a largely tribal party at that point of time in Tripura, unlike in Bengal, where the Communist Party was a party of the Bengali refugees. In Tripura, it was a tribal party. Now look at Tripura's MP elections, Lok Sabha elections. 1952, two seats from Tripura, both the seats won by communists. Communists, CPI. 57, both the seats won by CPI. 62, both the seats won by Tripura. Why? Because the tribals were still in a majority. 1967, which is exactly 20 years after partition, both the seats won by Congress, because the Congress had the backing of the Bengali refugees. Because the Congress knew that the communists have a tribal power, support base. So we need to build up our support base among the Bengali refugees. So they very strongly advocated refugee rehabilitation and this and that. And therefore, in 1967, the numbers had completely changed, and suddenly the communists lost both the seats. And who won these two seats? Both Congress candidates. One of them was a Bengali leader, but the other, in the tribal, reserved constituency, it was the king of Tripura, Kirit Vikram, who was a minor during partition, had grown up. This Maharaja became the Congress MP on a Congress ticket because he was supported by the Bengalis. The Congress supported the Bengalis, and therefore, in a matter of 20 years, the communists who were backed by the tribals, suddenly, for 3 consecutive Lok Sabha elections, they won both the seats from Tripura. If Tripura was not a chief commissioner province then and had its own assembly, the first communist government in Tripura would not have been in Kerala or Bengal, it would have been in Tripura. But then, both the Lok Sabha seats in 52, 57, 62 won by CPI. Why? Because of tribal support. 67, suddenly entire thing changes. And since then, it was different. So then the communists also had to look for, support from Bengalis. They did it. That's history. That's much later history. So this is how, democracy works. That democracy essentially is a game of numbers, and therefore smaller populations or populations which have been marginalized in their own homelands, like the tribes of Tripura, they feel very insecure with ballot box democracy because they think they had the numbers and they have lost it, and now they are not going to count.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that it also kind of mirrors the arrival of the British and British style democracy and the insecurities that Muslims went through with regards to their demands for separate electorates because they felt that they would not be well represented in a democratic state.
Yeah, I mean, lack of numbers creates a certain level of insecurity, and what holds true about the situation in Tripura might also hold true in the larger Indian macro situation. So that's, yeah, you have a point actually. But the one important thing I need to bring up is when people talk about partition, Tripura is a very different case, because it was a tribal state, and the coming of the Bengalis complicated the demographic situation. But as far as the partition scenario playing out in the neighborhood of Tripura, that is in what was East Pakistan or East Bengal, unlike Punjab, where the riots were whole scale, where there was a complete exchange of population, where one train full of butchered Hindus were coming from the other side, and one train full of butchered Muslims were going from this side. This is not the experience that we have faced in the East. And I'll give you an example. Our families had lands in Communal. And there was only one big riot in Noakhali in 1946, and prior to that, of course, in Calcutta. But Calcutta, the riots were concentrated not in Bengali pockets. Calcutta has a big population of Urdu speaking and Hindi speaking people, and the intensity of the Calcutta riots were faced. 16th August is the date when it started in 1946. The intensity of these riots were not in Bengali areas. This was felt in those areas of Calcutta, which still has, a strong Urdu and a Hindi-speaking population. But, in West Bengal, nowhere else outside Calcutta were there any riots. There were big Muslim populations in Murshidabad and Malda. There were big, other Hindu populations. So there was nothing. In East Bengal also, which became part of Pakistan because of its Muslim majority, except Noakhali, there was nothing. We are from Kumilla. In Kumilla, there was no riot, and my family exchanged lands with the family of someone who we call Rahim Chacha, because Rahim Chacha is a friend of my uncle. So they had lands in Tripura, our lands in Kumilla. We exchanged these lands, and we exchanged it peacefully. Then in 1971, when Pakistani army cracked down on Bengalis, both Hindus and Muslims, because of Sheikh Mujib's movement for independence, Rahim Chacha with his family people came to Agartala as refugees. My uncles did not allow them to go to the refugee camp. They were our mehman. And in our land, paddy land and some of the hillocks, we set up some bamboo and tin houses, because we can't obviously accommodate 28 people in our own house, though we have a fairly big house, joint family. So Rahim Chacha's entire family was sheltered for 8 long months during the Bangladesh Civil War in our land, because it was a question of honor. How can Mehman be sent to refugee camp? So they stayed with us. Even today, Azim Saab, when I worked for BD News in Dhaka, I would go to Communal, my ancestral place. Rahim Chacha's family, they are still so, we have such warm relation that Rahim Chacha's granddaughter Aisha gives me bhai phota. Bhai phota, is basically an Hindu thing. Sisters put tika on their, wishing brothers well. But my Muslim sisters also give me bhai phota because it's seen as a very Bengali thing. And Aisha is a big, Awami League leader in Communal now. She's going to contest the next MP election. She's my sister. She's as close to me as my own sister. So, as far as Hindu-Muslim thing is concerned, among the Bengalis, in East Bengal, the experience of Bengalis are very different. Even my mother tells me that her family was escorted to the border by her own vice principal, who was a Muslim League leader, Hasmutullah. I know these names from my mother. So, basically at personal level, at family levels, Hindu-Muslim relations continue to be very good, except in Noakhali, where there were very serious riots. There is a class factor there, but I don't want to elaborate on that. I know that. But in our place like Comilla, even today, I'm telling you this, our relationship with Rahim Chacha's family, with this girl Aisha, who is like my own sister, she came here 2 months ago, and stayed in my house. So, and she would go and offer namaz in the very room where my wife prays to her own gods. I don't pray. I'm an atheist, but my wife prays. And in the same Thakur Ghor, as we say, jahan unka, where she has these gods, Aisha would pray there, put on her mat and pray 5 times, 5 waqt namaz. No issue. So, as far as Bengal is concerned, we did not have that experience that Punjab experienced, which is why and this completely changes in 1971, because 1971 is an abnegation of 1947. And with the surge of secular Bengali nationalism led by Sheikh Mujib, it changed the complete landscape. And this struggle in Bangladesh by our Muslim brothers there had total support in Tripura, in West Bengal. Why? Because a lot of people here thought, justice has finally been done. Finally, sense has dawned. Finally, we Bengalis have figured out our real identity. People even say today that when we were divided, we lost out. Like in 47, when we are united, we got a country of our own. Bangladesh is a country, and we even Bengalis like us here, we are proud of Bangladesh. We are proud of Sheikh Hasina's achievement. We are proud of our Appa. We call her Appa. So these things are different here. In Punjab, partition ended up as a finality. We can see still some parotha diplomacy between Gujral Sahib and Nawaz Sharif and all those things happening. But here in Bengal, I am telling you, on the day Babri Masjid was being destroyed by these fanatics, in Calcutta, Dhaka theatre, led by Asaduzzaman Noor, was performing to a full house. And Asaduzzaman Noor later became the cultural minister. He was a very famous playwright. He became the cultural minister of Sheikh Hasina. So, these things, the dynamics here are very, very different, which is reflected in the politics of the eastern region, which is why, BJP does so well in many other places, but here, they can't do it. So these factors have to be taken into account.
So, could you please clarify that was so fascinating to hear, but could you please clarify what you said, the exchange of land? So, for example, in Punjab, there would be allotments and the government would allot you land. So how did this exchange of land work that you just mentioned?
In this case, the cases that I am telling you, government had nothing to do with it. Like
Wow.
my uncle, who was a senior Congress leader, a former freedom fighter, Shukumar Bhaumik, he was an extremely good friend of Rahimuddin Mia. And Rahimuddin Mia, they also had some lands in Kumilla, but most of their lands was in Agartala, Tripura, and which we own now. We had our house in Agartala, but most of our lands were in Kumilla. So what did we do? My uncle and Rohim, they were friends, and they said, "Boss, you give us your lands in Kumilla. We will go there because we will go to Pakistan. I think as Muslims we will go to Pakistan." And we said, "Okay, we are here in Agartala. We'll stay here." So we took over the lands owned by Rahim Mia in just near Agartala, and they took over our lands in Kumilla. And this was all done at a personal level, at a barter level. It was not that the value was exact and all. Who is bothered when there is so much chaos? But what I'm trying to tell you is we not only exchange land, we retain the relationship as if we are own relatives. So when they came with their entire family, chacha, chachi, their children, grandchildren, we did not allow them to go to refugee camp. We said, Mehman hai bhai. We put them up. We quickly, my uncle, by then he was an officer, and he got, bamboo is cheap. We can't make them pakka houses, but bamboo and tin. Immediately 7, 8 big rooms and toilets were created, and they stayed there. They did not go to refugee camp. And we gave them the rice, the other crops which we produce in our own fields for 2 whole seasons. The two crops were given out to them. We did not bring it home. Normally, we bring this crop home. And today, even today, when I go to Kumilla, I used to work in Dhaka, and on holidays I would go to Kumilla. These people won't leave me. They won't allow me to come back to Dhaka. They will, attack me saying, "Ah, tum bahut bada aadmi ban gaya. You have become a very big man. Dada, you need to stay with us." And I'm telling you today, Rahim Chacha's granddaughter Aisha is like my own sister. She gives me wife water. She comes to my house and stays here. And when she fights with her husband, she confides in me and my wife. So that is the level of relationship. So, partition was never a psychological finality in the East. That is the point I'm trying to make. And especially with 1971, it again opened the floodgates of relationship. People came here, people came there, and even today, these relationships go on. So, what happened in Punjab did not happen here. Punjab and Bengal are two different stories. And a lot of people don't realize that. A lot of people in Delhi, they think, Pakistan is a Muslim country, Bangladesh. Arey bhai, Bangladesh is a Muslim country, but Bangladesh is a Bengali country. Please understand this. Because the final identity of Bangladesh as it emerged after 71 is that of a Bengali nation.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. We have some interviews in the Partition Archive, actually a lot, which do mention this barter that you're talking about, of the exchange of lands and property. And finally, what I'd like to ask you is, like, you talked about Punjab, and in Punjab, people thought they would be able to go back and forth between East and West Punjab, but ultimately they were unable to because of the way the riots happened and the way the partition of Punjab took place. What was it like in Bengal?
Hello. Hello.
Yes, can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yes. Hello.
Okay, so just I had a last
Azim bhai,
question.
can you
The
repeat your
what
question?
was
Yeah.
Yes, I'll repeat it. So in Punjab, people thought they would come back and forth between their ancestral home and their new home in Pakistan, and same for India, but they couldn't because of the way partition happened and the violence. What was the situation like in Bengal? Were your family and other people in Bengal able to go back and forth between the East Pakistan and West Bengal borders?
Yes, yes. A lot of families, they go back and forth. And as I told you, one of the big things that Bangladesh today as a nation looks at, when they try to encourage tourism, is something that they call nostalgia tourism. That a lot of people from India, the Calcutta Deputy High Commission of Bangladesh, I mean, they give out something like 5 lakh visas in a year. And who are these people? Some of them do go for business, but a lot of these people are nostalgia tourists. They go back, they visit their home. Now, I know of a Bengali officer who fought in 1970, on a BSF officer. He may be given Liberation War Medal by Sheikh Hasina's government because he was the first Indian officer to fight in 1971. And his first request to the Bangladesh government is, can I go and visit my old village home somewhere in Mymensingh? And my wife went back to her family's ancestral home in Dinajpur 2 years ago before the COVID came. She was so well received. The local Awami League people, they accompanied her. They said, "Oh, your grandfather was a great lawyer, and during Durga Puja, it used to be big celebration. Sab log aate the. It was not restricted to Hindus. Everybody would come and take prasad, have a feast. It was a celebration for everybody. Which is why Sheikh Hasina gives this famous slogan. She's very famous for this slogan. She says, "Dharmo jar jar, Utsav Shavar." So today, when you have Durga Puja in Bangladesh or Eid in Bangladesh, Hindus also join in celebrations, and the other way around there during Durga Puja. In Agartala, my hometown, Azim Sab, during Durga Puja, a lot of people come from Bangladesh to see Durga Puja in full flow because it's celebrated. Most of these people who come from across the border taking temporary visas are Muslims. But they come there why? They don't come there to pray and worship the Hindu gods or goddesses. They come there to have a good time, to enjoy, to have a drink here, have some good food there, dance around, have fun. It's a different experience. So, and whenever there is a during the big festivals, Muslim festivals, our people go on the other side. So that's why Sheikh Hasina gives this slogan, "Dharmo jar jar, Utsav Savar." Dharam jiska jiska apna, Utsav sabhi ke liye. So that is the spirit here. There are occasional problems here and there. There are fundamentalists on either side of the border, the troublemakers, and some trouble happens. But broadly, this is the spirit. That we wait for Eid to get invited and have a good biryani and all that. Our sisters and bhabis will cook that, and the other way around during puja. So you know that's what it is. My sisters, my Muslim sisters, they say that our festivals end very quickly. It's a one-day thing. Maximum 2 days. So puja 5 days, हम 5 दिन 5 साड़ी पहन के घूमेंगे. So that is the way people look at it. So my Muslim sister says, no, 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 puja is very important for us because on 5 days I'll put on 5 different saris and go around. Women thing. So that is how people look at it. And broadly speaking, I'm telling you, I have seen this. The Bengali, broadly speaking, there are fundamentalists everywhere. But broadly speaking, in Bengal, the problem was political. I don't want to go into that. 1937, Fazlullah Krishak Praja Party, he came to join hands with the Congress. It's the Congress right wing, Patel and all these people drove him off and he went and joined Muslims. So Bengal's partition had a lot to do with the politics. But at a personal level, the relationship, is very warm, very warm. And 1971 actually changed the whole thing. Because 1971 was an upsurge of Bengali identity-based nationalism, and therefore that changed. And today, people in power in Bangladesh are those people. Who is in power? Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was killed by army and all these people. But his daughter is very much in power, Sheikh Hasina, and she is the universal Appa of everybody. So, I know her personally, so I can tell you. She is a devout पांच वक्त नमाज करने वाला Muslim, but she does not bring that into her politics. She does not practice political Islam. Others like Jamaat Islami, they do political Islam, but she is a practicing Muslim, but her politics is absolutely secular.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Shubir, and that wonderful narratives you told us about the partition in Bengal and Tripura. And like you said, we tend to get bogged down in the Punjabi experience of partition and color it as the whole experience of partition all across South Asia. But it's very important that we realized that there were many different kinds of partition and with different
As I
effects
gave you a
on
very
different
simple
kinds of
example, the
people.
day the Babri Masjid was being brought down in Ayodhya or whatever, here in Calcutta, I remember I was a BBC correspondent. I was here, the Dhaka theatre was performing to a full house. Asaduzzaman Noor, Ramendu Majumdar, Firdausi Majumdar. And culturally speaking, today in the Bengal film industry in Calcutta, the big heroines are all from Bangladesh. Joya and my dear sister. She's the top heroine here. Rafaid Rashid Mithila, like that. So, this cultural thing, this binds us very strongly. As one of our poets had said, Amra bhashaye ek, bhalobashaye ek. We have the same language and we are bounded by the love of that language. So linguistic identity cements a very strong secular Bengali identity which persists across the border, and therefore partition may have been a political finality here but certainly not a psychological finality.
Yes, and I hope Punjab also learns from this Bengali experience, and we're able to. I would, for myself, like you talked about nostalgia tourism, I would love to engage in that nostalgia tourism and go across
No, it
to
does
East
happen in
Punjab.
Punjab also, Azim Saab. I think, a lot of
Yeah,
Pakistanis,
yeah,
when they come to Mohali and all that for test matches, there is a lot of bonhomie. I have seen that. I
yes.
have lived in Punjab and I speak decent, good Punjabi. So I know that, but, it's not at the level that we have, that even families now have a relationship. Like my family and, Rahim Chacha's family, Aisha's family. I mean, she would, when she fights with her husband, call me up, Dada, aisa ho gaya, waisa ho gaya. She'll call up, Bodhi, aisa ho gaya, waisa ho gaya, like that. So that thing does not exist in Punjab. Certainly not. So,
Yeah, I mean, we had the Samjhauta Express, and there were efforts being undertaken at governmental levels um, to forge that friendship and to connect East and West Punjab. But unfortunately, with recently, especially since the rise of the BJP, that has taken a complete backseat.
but here in
Anyway,
Bengal, we have three Moitri Express. And now we are not only going to have Dhaka, Kolkata, we are going to have Calcutta, Dhaka, Agartala Express after one part of the elevated express rail track is done in Agartala side. Then we are going to have trains from all over the place in Bangladesh to all parts of West Bengal. From Siliguri, a new Moitri Express is going to Dhaka. From Khulna, it will come here. So, pre-partition transport linkages are being requested. And one of the major reasons for that is, Bangladeshis today, you look at the Indian tourist arrival figures, 23% of the total tourist arrival figures in India are Bangladeshis, my dear sir. Regardless of what Amit Shah says, they are termites and all that nonsense that he says. 23% of these tourists are, most of them are medical tourists. Most of these people today, one of my sisters from Bangladesh, Shahnaz Parveen Dori, her apa usko leke, getting treated for cancer in Tata Memorial Cancer Hospital here. She's come. I'm supposed to, organize things for her doctor's appointment and all that. So the point I'm trying to make is that for shopping during the Eid, they come here to Calcutta. I asked some of these Bangladeshi sisters of mine, why do you come? Your saris are good. Dada, our saris only 2 or 3 varieties. India is a diverse country. We get 20 different kinds of saris. So, we come here. For treatment, they all come here. They go up to Chennai and all that, Apollo Hospital, this and that. So 23% of India's tourist arrivals are Bangladeshis. And mind you, most of them are medical tourists. They spend a lot more money than some of these backpacking hippies who come here and smoke a bit of cannabis and go away. So they bring money, they come here, get operated, 20 lakhs, 30 lakhs they spend here. So Bangladesh, West Bengal's, especially Calcutta's retail sector, it thrives on Bangladesh. Healthcare sector, it thrives on Bangladesh. So added to the emotional bondings, the cultural bondings, you now have a strong economic linkage growing here. And this is a fact of life, which, all this talk about, Bangladesh is being terminated. We don't accept that nonsense. Bangladesh is a growing economy today. And the impact of that growing economy spilling over to the neighboring states of India. So we welcome that.
yeah. And thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have to wrap
Yeah,
up the
sure,
talk
sure.
right now. We have another speaker. It was wonderful talking to you. And thank you to those who are joining us. Please be online to join our second speaker of the evening, Dr. Antara Chatterjee. We'll be back online in a few seconds.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Hello everyone. I'm a Prajata, a story scholar with the 1947 Partition Archive, and it is my pleasure to be your host today. Welcome to the 75 Days of Partition series. This is day 74 of hosting esteemed guest for the series. And with just one more day to go, we are going to continue till August 17th. Today, it is an honor to welcome the second speaker of today's series, Dr. Antara Chatterjee. Dr. Antara Chatterjee is Assistant Professor at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Science Education and Research, Bhopal, India. Her research interests include South Asian literatures, partition studies, trauma and memory studies, and environmental and medical humanities. She has published in South Asian Review, Humanities, and in edited collections, The South Asian Short Story, and Science Fiction in India, Parallel Worlds, and Post-Colonial Paradigms. She has co edited and contributed a chapter to the book Pandemics and Epidemics in Cultural Representation, published by Springer in 2022. She has received grants and awards from the University Grants Commission (UGC), India, the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla, India, the Charles Wallace India Trust, the Indian Council of Historical Research, the 1947 Partition Archive, and Tata Trust. She recently completed her tenure as the Strauss Visiting Fellow at the Cedar Sinai Center for Medicine, Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the Cedar Sinai Medical Center, Los Angeles, United States, from June to July 2022. Welcome, Dr. Chatterjee. I'm sorry, I think I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, definitely. I can hear you now.
Good.
Welcome here,
Can hear
ma'am.
you. Thank you so much. And it's a great pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity to talk here and share some of my interests and work with the 1947 Partition Act.
It's so good to have you here. So, let me begin by asking you the first question. Can you throw some light, since you have chosen this topic that you on disease and contagion during the partition? So, can you throw some light on what kind of disease were rampant at the time of partition?
Yes. Uh, thank you again, Aparajita, and good evening, everyone. Good evening to those in South Asia, and good morning or afternoon to people in other parts of the world. Thank you for that question. So, I'll begin by sharing some of the insights that I have drawn from my work with the Partition Archive last year, as well as my recent work at the Cedar Sinai Center for Medicine, Holocaust, and Genocide Studies, where I have been working on disease, contagion, and trauma in the 1947 partition. Let me tell you, while communal violence had killed more than an estimated 1 million people during the partition, thousands more had perished due to the outbreak of diseases, especially infectious diseases like tuberculosis, cholera, dysentery, typhoid, and so on, during the border crossing after the drawing of the boundaries, forming the two new nation states, India and Pakistan, in 1947, and also later in overcrowded unhygienic and insanitary environments in refugee camps and settlements across the subcontinent. And research has shown that the incidence of epidemic outbreaks was especially high in refugee camps in Bengal, unlike refugee camps in Punjab and in northern India, due to the concatenation of a variety of reasons. And some of the diseases which were widespread in some of the refugee camps in West Bengal in the 1950s and early 1960s include tuberculosis, cholera, smallpox, and so on. I give these examples from Bengal because my work focuses particularly on the Bengal side of the partition. So from my reading of sources like the work of historians like Shekhar Bandyopadhyay, Joya Chatterjee, Hoymonti Roy, Swati Sengupta Chatterjee and others, I find these references to a disease outbreak in the refugee camps in Bengal. So I'll give a few examples. For instance, Jirat camp had a very high incidence of dysentery and fever. Nodia camp had outbreak of cholera. Cooper's camps had outbreaks of smallpox, malaria, tuberculosis, and other diseases. Ghushuri and Kashipur camps had a very high rate of child mortality. Dhubulia camp again had instances of cholera, smallpox, diphtheria, and so on. So this is just to give a brief glimpse into the range of diseases, infectious diseases, which were rampant in many parts of West Bengal in the refugee camps after partition.
Dr. Chatterjee, you have mentioned a list of historians that you based your research on. So where were, how were the records maintained, and like any kind of medical records were maintained to derive all this information from, and were they providing a realistic picture?
Yeah, so there has been some historical research in this domain of disease and health during the partition and in the aftermath of the partition, but not much. Partition research has focused, as we know, overwhelmingly on questions of violence, on the causes, on the aftermath, on memory, memorial cultures, and afterlife, and has focused predominantly on homelessness, violence, displacement, trauma, and so on. So there has not been a lot of research on the question of disease outbreak and health and sanitation in the context of the partitions. So while the bodily violence of rape, mutilation, and death has been the object of significant partition research, till now, the bodily trauma of disease and loss of health has not been studied that much. So there have been some historians like Shekhar Bandyopadhyay and Shati Sengupta Chatterjee, whom I mentioned, who have thrown some light on this. I have found references to disease outbreak as well as references to measures taken by the state to address disease outbreak, such as preventive measures like inoculation and vaccination drives, for instance. In official documents which are available in the National Archives in Delhi and also the West Bengal State Archives, which include letters, correspondence, minutes of meetings, memos, and so on. For instance, in the official papers of the Department of Relief and Rehabilitation. I've also found references to disease in the wake of the partition in legislative proceedings as well in West Bengal. So, with respect to your second question about whether these records provide a realistic picture of the state of health and disease in the wake of the partition, I would say that official documents can only provide one part of the picture. So documentation was not consistent, accurate, and incomplete. Official documents also highlight aspects like focus on what the state of disease
Dr. Chatterjee, there's some problem with your internet connection. We're not able to hear you properly.
My now.
Can you try again with your internet connection? No, we are not able to hear you properly at all. Please try connecting again. So we are facing some internet connection issue from our speaker side. And while she was telling us about, all the records and the kind of records that she has accessed for basing her research on disease and contagion that were widespread in the wake of partition. And so she will be back to describe you more about her research. Let's wait for a few seconds.
Hello?
Hello, yes, Dr. Chatterjee.
Am I audible
It is better.
now?
Yes,
Yeah,
you're audible and it is better.
I'm extremely sorry. Yeah, I have no idea how the internet failed. So
And that
I hope
happens.
you can hear me now.
Yes,
So sorry about this interruption. So
it's
please
okay.
do
You
let
can
me
carry
know
on.
if this happens again.
Yes.
So I was telling you about the different kinds of records that I have accessed. I hope you were able to hear me hear that part of the conversation. That letters and meetings of minutes and memos from the Ministry of Relief and Rehabilitation, which I have accessed from the National Archives of Delhi and the West Bengal State Archives. I've also found some references to disease in legislative proceedings from West Bengal. So, as I was saying, that official documents, however, can only provide one part of the picture, and documentation was not complete or consistent, and sometimes it was sporadic. So, official documentation also often highlighted particular aspects like inoculation, with a focus on what the state did in the wake of disease rather than focus on the statistics of actual disease outbreak. So I have found this in my work in the archives, that instead of finding records of actual numbers of patients and so on, I did find more references to the number of people inoculated and so on. So we can say that official documents provide one strand of the narrative. However, the narrative was actually more complex and multidimensional, or rather, we can say that there were multiple narratives about disease outbreak during and in the aftermath of the partition. So, in order to gather a fuller picture, about disease outbreak during and in the wake of the 1947 partition. In my research, I am actually drawing on different kinds of sources and narratives. For instance, cultural narratives like literary and film texts, oral histories, memoirs, non-fictional works, newspaper reports, as well as official documents to examine how disease outbreak in the wake of the partition was understood and employed in these different kinds of narratives, in this range of narratives.
That would be fascinating to hear how you have drawn. Can you draw any major references to the depiction of disease during partition in films and literature?
Yes, absolutely. So my focus in this research is predominantly on cultural texts like literary and film texts. So several literary and film texts from the 1950s and 1960s describe disease, particularly diseases like tuberculosis with its most palpable symptoms of fever and cough, to represent the aftermath and trauma of the partition on the hapless refugees ravaged by poverty, unemployment, malnutrition, dislocation, and loss. So some of the literary texts include short stories like Flotsam and Jetsam by Pratibha Bosu. The Final Solution, the Bengali title is Upay by Manik Bandyopadhyay. And novels like Bokultola PL Camp, PL means permanent liability, by Narayan Shannal in 1955, Nirbash, which is translated as Homeless, from 1957 by Omio Bhushan Mojumdar, then Meghe Dhaka Tara, which is a novel by Shaktipada Rajguru, The Cloud-Capped Star, which was made into a film of the same name by the renowned Bengali filmmaker Ritwik Ghatak in 1960. Then there was the film Chinnomul, which can be translated as Uprooted by Nimai Ghosh in 1950. So there are all of these different literary and film texts that I have found through my preliminary survey till now. So interestingly, we find that while there were several diseases which were rampant at the time, like the ones I mentioned at the start, like cholera, smallpox, malaria, etc., in many of these literary and film texts, we find a preponderance of and almost a kind of a paradigmatic representation of tuberculosis as the disease of suffering and deprivation in the post-partition milieu. So we find this in Meghe Dhaka Tara, where the long-suffering female protagonist Nita, whose life takes the heaviest blows of the post-partition hardships faced by the family, ultimately contracts and dies of tuberculosis. We also see post-partition refugees suffering from tuberculosis in the novels Bokultola PL Camp and Nirbash in the characters of Vrindavan and Mohit, respectively. And we also see how the suffering and diseased body of the husband becomes a conduit in these texts, these two novels that I mentioned, to signal the gendered vulnerability of the partition. Something that I am focusing on in my research, which is represented through the hardships of their wives. And a gendered precarity that is also revealed in Meghe Dhaka Tara as well, which I mentioned just now. Yeah, and we find that in other short stories as well, in Flotsam and Jetsam as well, we find the child of the female protagonist suffering from fever, and the child even dies from that. So in my understanding and in my reading of these literary texts, I would say that literary texts form an alternative archive which disrupt and challenge dominant or state-endorsed narratives, and nuance the many histories of the partition. And disease becomes a complex and multi-dimensional register to apprehend the partition and its trauma, its traumatic aftermath. So, in many ways, in some of these literary and film texts, I would say that disease becomes a layered metaphor, which evokes not just contemporary realities of actual disease outbreaks, but the trauma, suffering, and chaos of the bifurcation. So, in some of these texts, the breakdown of the individual body as well as the collective, ravaged by epidemics, mirrors the collapse of the community and the disintegration of social cultural frameworks. And the vulnerable body becomes a register to signal the precariousness of the displaced millions in the wake of the partition and the abrupt drawing of the borders in 1947. So, yeah, I could say more, but I think I will stop here.
No, you can continue if you wish to say more. But I was just mentioning that it's very interesting. But as I noticed that all of these texts, both literary and film texts that you have reference for your research, these are Bengali. So, have you been able to find such kind of references in other language, for example, Hindi, maybe Urdu, Punjabi, any kind of other language texts? Or maybe
Yes.
mainstream cinema as well?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. So, um, my focus is primarily on Bengal, as my own particular situation and background also determines my own position in this research. So I myself come from a displaced family which was displaced from East Bengal at the time of the partition. And of course, I have access to all of these texts in the Bengali language. So many of them have not been translated. So I am able to read them in the original, of course. So therefore, my focus on Bengal, it might come across as a kind of an uneven distribution of text, but I am also looking at Punjab and also Sindh, and trying to see if I can find references. So I have found a couple of short stories by Manto, in which I do find references to disease outbreak. The Maker of Martyrs by Manto is one such short story. I'm in the process of looking for more. I'm also looking at some Sindhi short stories which have been translated into English. But yeah, because of language constraints, I do not have access to works which have not been translated. So I am looking at some of these. For instance, I would also like to look at Pinjar by Amrita Pritam, in which we find the question of gendered vulnerability, and the question of the body and bodily vulnerability in the part of the text where Puro is experiencing pregnancy and childbirth.
Yeah.
But that is before the partition, and yeah, so it follows on to other parts of the narrative. But yeah, I mean, I would like to look at these multifarious aspects of the gendered dimension of partition in my larger work, with respect to the body and disease.
Thank you so much for your answer, ma'am. Uh, like all these references that you have drawn from films and literature, were you able to find such kind of references in memoirs and oral histories as well?
Yes. So, as I mentioned, I am looking at a broad range of sources in this project. So, I'm not only looking at literary and film texts, I'm also looking at memoirs, autobiographies, and also very significantly oral histories, which I have accessed through my work with the 1947 Partition Archive last year. I did find significant number of references to disease outbreak, particularly diseases like cholera. Can you still hear me, Aparajita?
Yes, yes, I can hear you, ma'am. Yes, I'm able to hear
Aparajita,
you,
can you
Dr.
still hear
Chatterjee.
me?
Yes, I can hear
Yes.
you.
Okay. Yeah, because I think, yeah, because your video was frozen for a few seconds, so I got a bit worried. Yeah, I am looking at oral histories, which I found through the 1947 Partition Archive. These go through oral history collections compiled by poets like Urvashi Bhutalia, Onindurai Chaudhuri, and so on. And I'm also looking at some memoirs, again, these are Bengali texts, like the memoirs Ora Ajo Udbastu, which can be translated as they are still homeless or they are still uprooted, by Dulalendu Chattopadhyay from 1963. Then I'm also looking at another autobiography interrogating my Chandal life, the autobiography of Dalit by Manoranjan Bapari, in which he also recounts his experience in a refugee camp in Bakura, Srimonipur, Bakura, in post-partition Bengal. So I'm looking at these oral histories and memoirs as well. And several of these oral histories do recount disease outbreak. Particularly, I accessed quite a few oral histories from the Punjab side, which mentioned the outbreak of disease, particularly waterborne diseases like cholera and so on during the border crossing, because we all know that partition happened in August during the monsoons, and so there were
Right,
environmental factors and triggers as well,
right.
which led to some of these. And of course, there were uh, you know, the episodes of violence, and the dead bodies of those killed were often flung in water bodies, in ponds, in rivers, in wells. A lot of women, for instance, killed themselves in wells. So as a result, we find a pollution of water sources, rampant pollution of water sources, which led to a lot of waterborne diseases. So I do find references in oral histories and some of the memoirs that yeah, I am looking at.
I have encountered such kind of narratives myself while I've been collecting oral histories. An interviewee would
Oh,
tell
yeah.
me that, at a station, the train stopped and they were so thirsty, they also had a small baby to whom they had to give the water, and the well was all bloodied. So what did they do? They had a small glass, they covered it with with a cloth, and then they try to filter it with that cloth and then drink it. And that's
Yeah.
terrible, that people didn't even have the clean water to drink while they were traveling. And of course, some have also told me how the younger babies were more prone to getting all these diseases because they were not safe at all. They were in very unhygienic conditions, and they, after they reached, they took the trauma of all the traveling, and as they reached the refugee camp, they died. They could not be saved. No
Yes,
kind
yes.
of
I
medical
have
treatment was provided
also,
to them in time.
yeah, I also found some of these oral histories where we see, uh, these stories being recounted of how babies or children had to be left behind, who died on the way. And so there were a lot of these incredibly tragic episodes where people, the elderly, as well as newborns, could not survive the hardships and the trauma, and died on the way before crossing the border.
So my next question is Dr. Chatterjee. Since we are talking about age, we are talking about small children. Was partition in any way, all these outbreaks, treatment during partition, were they intersecting with other factors as well, like gender, class, caste, and community?
Yes, absolutely. We find that disease and its construction during the time intersected with dimensions, other social paradigms and dimensions like religion, gender, caste, class, and so on. And that is one significant question that informs my research, my larger project. So I am looking at not only the histories of disease outbreak among the displaced in the wake of partition, but also uh, crucially looking at or attempting to examine the representation and construction of disease, sickness, and contagion in the context of the partition in different kinds of narratives. And when it comes to the construction of disease, we often find in different kinds of contexts, we often find the association of disease with certain groups, with certain communities, and we found that a lot in the wake of the partition when disease was being associated and identified with the migrants who were coming in, with the refugees who were coming in. So we do find the experience of the displacement and the experience of disease in the wake of the partition to be inflected quite strongly by some of these parameters. So, caste especially is a crucial dimension with respect to the constructions of disease and contagion, as notions of the body, purity, pollution, touch, segregation, and isolation are centrally inscribed in both of these discourses of caste and contagious disease. So we find references to the intersection of caste with health and disease in the context of post-partition refugee camp life in the autobiographical work of Monarchy, whom I mentioned. So that particular camp in which he lived as a young boy was a camp which was inhabited largely by lower caste Dalit refugees. So and conditions were appalling and more appalling than in many other camps. So definitely these were inflected by some of these social paradigms. Gender too was a significant determinant. And we do find references to gendered experiences of health and illness. For instance, issues with maternal health, childbirth, death during childbirth, in both in historical records and oral histories, as well as in some literary and film texts. Some of the texts which I mentioned before, like Meghadata and Mukultola PL camp and Nibash and so on, where we find disease also becoming a significant trope to represent the gendered vulnerability of the partition. So certainly, I would say that gender, caste, and class, which was again intimately tied with caste, these were important determinants in the ways in which disease was also experienced in post-partition Bengal.
That's a very fascinating strand of research you are doing based on partition, and because it has been so under researched, I think researchers would be able to from other parts of the area as well would be able to find references in other kind of other regional texts, maybe in Punjabi, maybe in Urdu. Um, I would like to ask you last question, Dr. Chatterjee, that would you share your experience of working with the archive and then later at Cedar Sinai Medical Center, and how you were able to enrich your research while you were working with them?
Yes, thank you for that question. So I'd definitely like to take this opportunity to, share how much I learned from my experience of working with the oral histories at the 1947 Partition Archive. So it was a fascinating and enriching experience for me to access those oral histories. And so I went through a range of interviews and oral histories from Bengal as well as from Punjab, from uh, people in current Pakistan or Bangladesh, as well as, of course, people in India. So it was a great learning experience, and I've tried to build on that work in my research fellowship that I took up at the Cedar Sinai Center for Medicine, Holocaust, and Genocide Studies over the last 2 months. There also, I did access oral histories through a collection of oral histories which are housed in the University of Southern California's Center for Advanced Genocide Research. And that has opened up a whole new range of possibilities for me, because I've accessed a lot of oral histories on the Holocaust and disease outbreak in ghettos and camps during the Holocaust history. So these are some of the possibilities that have emerged from my work. And other than the different literary and cultural sources that I am using for this project, these oral histories have really, I think, opened up a fascinating dimension in my work. And I would definitely like to pursue this further and see where I can go with this strand of my research, and particularly if I can bring the partition history and some parts of the Holocaust history together through this lens of disease. So that is something that I would like to explore in the coming days. And my work with both of these have given me this opportunity. So I hope that I'm able to build on this work and consolidate this project.
While we have, extensively drawn from the trauma studies of the Holocaust, and we have tried to apply that to the Indian scenario and all the other kind of,
Exactly.
places where genocides take place, I think this would be really interesting to draw a parallel between the disease and contagions and
Exactly,
outbreaks during these two, historical events. That would be really fascinating to, read. So
Yes,
it was a
that is
great
exactly
pleasure.
what. Yeah. So I was just saying that we have drawn theoretical frameworks and insights from Holocaust studies in terms of trauma and memory and so on. But this is something that deeply interests me, and I would definitely like to see if I can take this work further in this particular direction.
Yes. It was a great pleasure talking to you, Dr. Chatterjee, today. And thank you for sharing all your research and findings with us.
Thank you.
And
Thank you so much,
thank you for coming
Aparajita.
to.
Yeah, thank you so much for this conversation and the questions. It was a pleasure talking to you. It was a pleasure sharing some insights from my work. And it's a great honor to be talking on a platform of the 1947 Partition Archive. So thank you so much. And I apologize once more for the internet glitch.
That's okay, ma'am. That happens all the time. So thank you. And those who are joining us, please be online to join our last speaker of the evening, Fahad Nahvi. Fahad will contextualize the timeline of the partition in 1947, which is a continuation of what Ehsan and Debanjan have been doing for the last 2 days. We are coming online in a few seconds. Please stay online.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 75 Days of Partition series. This is day 74, and we are on our third speaker for today. Welcome, Fahad. How are you?
Hi, Azim. I'm good. Am I audible?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Am I audible though?
Okay, so Fahad is a social media research intern at the archive and has been researching the timeline of partition for more than a year. And today he will continue presenting the newspaper clippings from his extensive research. Can you hear me, Fahad?
Yeah.
Okay,
So I'll
let's
be
dive straight
presenting from
in.
15th.
Okay, let's dive straight in. Please present us your PowerPoint.
Yeah, so I'll be presenting from 15th August to 20th August. So I'm starting from the Amrita Bazaar Patrika and the Dawn. Both of them were celebrating the Independence Day of the countries that they were published in now. Dawn was celebrating the birth of Pakistan, while Amrita Bazaar Patrika was celebrating the independence of India. So on the left hand, we see how the entire page is dedicated to the to a free India, and on the right hand side we have a dawn which represents the birth of Pakistan, and then they are also talking about the colorful how well they celebrated the independence of both of these countries, and I'll show you some clips later from the celebrations. Yeah, can you move on to the next slide? Yeah. The king sent his message to the Park Assembly on achieving independence, and uh, he congratulated all the people of Pakistan on achieving this historic development. And same for India, we see messages and greetings coming from the well-wishers from across the spectrum. There is from Clement Attlee, who was the then Prime Minister of Britain, and then also the Chinese ambassador to India, Dr. Chian Luan Lo. He also penned a poem that I have put in the next slide to congratulate India on achieving the independence. Can you move to the next slide? I don't have the conclusion. Yeah. So the poem was called "The Chant for the Indian Freedom." and I have put it here so that people can later pause and read the entire poem if they want. It's on the left hand. Then from the Amrita Bazaar Patrika, we also see the second page, in which there's the crowd. It mentions a crowd of 50,000 people that they were there to greet the Premier Jawaharlal Nehru, and then they took the pledge. Lord Mountbatten was appointed as the Governor General, while Jawaharlal Nehru and the others were. Jawaharlal Nehru was appointed as the Premier, while the rest of the cabinet was also formed. Next page, please. Yeah. And on Dawn, the Dawn newspaper, we see that they were eagerly waiting for the Qaid Azam's broadcast, who in his broadcast that is not mentioned here in this newspaper sent a message to entire Pakistani population that peace should prevail, and they have to put an end to this internal strife if they have to ever come out of the horrors of the British colonial period, and then they need to stick together uh, to develop Pakistan as a nation. Yeah, next page, please. Here I have put on some clippings of ads from these newspapers. On the left hand, we see H. Kareem Baksh and Sons, who were importers. They congratulate all nationals of Pakistan on achieving their freedom. The middle one is from the Radio Supply Store Limited, and they were congratulating India and the companies like Union Life Insurance Company that were operating in both the countries at the time. They sent out a message to both the dominions of India and Pakistan and wished them prosperity. So I put these here for everyone to see how these different business enterprises, tried to capitalize on the independence fervor and wished everyone. Can we move to the next page? Yeah. And the jubilation of independence was not limited to the territory of India alone. This Indian soldiers, the battalion that was serving in Tokyo at the time, they celebrated the Indian Independence Day in the Imperial Palace. And August 15 was then announced as a holiday across the British Commonwealth area. On the right hand, there's an image from the Amrita Bazaar Patrika archive that shows Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose when he addressed 84,000 strong INA in Japan, prisoners who were prisoners of Japan at Singapore. So this is a photo from that, and I thought this will go well with the celebration that happened in Tokyo. So I have put it here also. This is a photo of Lord Mountbatten, who was the last viceroy of India, and here he is seen assuming the charge of the Governor General of the Dominion of India. He was not announced as the Governor General of the Dominion of Pakistan. Muhammad Ali Jinnah himself took that charge, and Liaquat Ali Khan was made the Prime Minister. We also see the Sikh delegation consisting of Mr. Devan Singh and Mr. Rahul Singh that went to the 10 Downing Street, and their concern was about the boundary commission, which was set up to divide Punjab, and they were concerned that the demands of the Sikhs won't be paid heed to, so they were there to ensure that they also have a representation in that. Mahatma Gandhi celebrated the Independence Day in his own style with fasting that day too, and along with him, the outgoing premier of the United Bengal province, Sohrawardi, he was also there to fast with him. And for Gandhi, the independence was not the end goal; it was just a part of the process, and the nation still had to develop. And so, his way to celebrate it was just like any regular day. He fasted, he spun a little, and then he prayed. On the other hand, can you go back to the previous slide? Yeah. So the Lucknow residency was the only place since 1857 where the Union Jack of the British Empire hadn't been hauled down, and this was the first time in 90 years that the flag of the British Empire was finally taken down from the Lucknow residency. Yeah, next please. Yeah. This is a cartoon from the Amrita Bazar Patrika, and where they were sort of celebrating independence in their own style, that the Gandhian politics had trumped the uh, British colonialism, and this is a representative of that. This is the photo of the swearing in of the Chief Justice of India as well as Jawaharlal Nehru and the rest of the cabinet, and it was done. They were sworn in by the then Viceroy Lord Mountbatten, who will now become the Governor General of India, the Dominion of India. So you can see here. Oh, okay. Yeah. So in the center of the photo, you can see Jawaharlal Nehru with Lord Mountbatten, and the person second left of Jawaharlal Nehru was the person on the extreme right. There is Lady Mountbatten, and then the rest of the cabinet you can find on the left hand side of the image. Next slide, please. This is something that I got from the Times of India, and this is the breakdown of the revenue of the central and provincial Indian and Pakistan, central and provincial revenues of India and Pakistan. So we can see here the disparity between the revenues of the two. It was supposed to it was based on the population, but even then, the central revenue of Pakistan is like extremely less than the central revenue that would form the India's share in it, and that is something that did not go well with the Pakistani government, and they had raised it, but then they had raised the issue, but this was the final. This was still the final outcome. Yeah, and these are the photographs of the governors of the provinces of the Indian Dominion, and they took charge on 15th August, and you can see there's Sarojini Naidu in that photo. There is B.C. Roy, there is Ken Kadju, among others. Only one woman though, which is Sarojini Naidu.
So Fahad,
And
I have one question for you. Even yesterday we were watching a slide, and the newspapers were referring it as the Indian Dominion. So
yeah,
how long did they call it the Indian Dominion, or was it like an official term or not?
it was an official term till the constituent assemblies would be dissolved and a former constitution would come into place.
Okay, thank you
Yeah.
for clarifying.
Yeah. On the left hand, we have the Pakistan provincial governors, and below that is the list of Pakistan provincial premiers. And on the right hand, we have the chief of armed forces of both India and Pakistan, and all of them were Britishers. Yeah. Yeah, and see, the papers that I referred till now were Amrita Bazar Patrika and Times of India, and and I only found one mention of in Amrita Bazar Patrika, that was the clashes that happened in Lahore, um, but apart from that, it was just celebration of, and even in Dawn, it was just celebration of the independence of India and Pakistan. But now the headlines on this page and the rest of the news also is from the Civil and Military Gazette, that was essentially a mouthpiece of the British government. It was based out of Karachi or Lahore, I think. And it didn't congratulate either of the two dominions on achieving independence. It just the first headline on the front page was "Murder and arson reached new peak, 111 killed and 116 injured," and just news of the clashes or the communal riots and the arson that was taking place. The front page was just filled with that, and uh, zero instances of celebration find mention in the first page of the paper, at least in the first page of the paper. um, and while the other papers like TOI or Amrita Bazar Patrika or even Dawn, they were just happy reporting the jubilant celebrations of achieving independence. So here we see an armed band of 61 in Amritsar was shot dead by the Punjab boundary force. Uh, they were going to come to Amritsar and try to hurl crude bombs, and they also were armed with guns, and they were just there out there to cause communal riots, and 61 of them were shot dead by the Punjab boundary force. It was an organized thing that now people were from all the communities. People were just organizing themselves and conducting raids in the uh, villages or towns of the uh, and using opposite just to make a distinction of the opposite communities. And yeah, some of them were killed by the Punjab boundary force. And in the walled city of Lahore, a lot of arson took place. Places of worship were burned down. And despite the leaders calling for end to violence, the violence did not end at all until then. We'll see the violence go on for like at least 3-4 days, and then the newspaper reports start coming in. Okay, there was quiet in this area after so long. But even after that, the day, for example, a newspaper would report that, in other newspapers you would find instances of some sort of violence elsewhere, or in maybe in those places, but a little less, like only like 3 or 4 people killed. They made it a sort of numbers game in that sense. Yeah, the next slide, please. Yeah. For example, here we see Rampur returns to normal, all quiet for last few days, and but then in the next clippings we'll see how even more violence had occurred in Kanpur and areas of Gujarat. And the moment they start mentioning, oh, there is little less violence that's happening, there's relative calm in Amritsar and Lahore, and then we'll still find mentions in other clippings that it wasn't complete calm. Instances of communal riot were still there, and people were still going haywire with all the communal ruckus. The other news that came from Kashmir was that the Prime Minister of Jammu and Kashmir that did not want to enter into any relationship with any dominion, either of Pakistan or of India, and they wanted to stay independent. And on the extreme end of this slide um, is a blurb by Sarat Chandra Bose. It was more of an appeal to the minorities that were living in East Bengal now, and he asked them to like the Muslims in the West Bengal part, which was in the Indian Dominion, had accepted the Tiranga and had celebrated with their Hindu compatriots in the same spirit. Hindus in East Bengal should do that also, accept the Pakistan flag and then celebrate with them, so that this internal strife or the communal riots would come to an end. Yeah, next slide. On the eve of the independence, 2 new films were released in across India as well as Pakistan. One was Shehnai and the other one was Mera Geet. And I thought this is just interesting to put like what was the cultural scene at the moment. So these were the movies that the people were watching, and they, they sold like they sold out like pretty well. Um, yeah. There is also this image of frontier Gandhi Khanavi Ghaffar Khan from the Amrita Bazar Patrika, and for like at least 2-3 weeks, there was the newspapers did not carry any news from the northwestern frontier province, and it's just on the eve of the 15th August, the editor of the newspaper just asked me what will happen to the frontier, and the only answer would lie with Khanavi Ghaffar Khan, but he hadn't spoken yet on it. So yeah. Next slide, please. Now we move on to 17th August, because for 16th August, neither TOI nor Amrita Bazar Patrik or any other newspaper that I found, they were not available for this date for 16th August, and I'm only guessing it would be because of the celebration of Independence Day that they were not able to. That's my guess. that they were not able to print the next edition, and it's directly on 17th August that they carry the news for both 16th as well as 17th, 16th, 15th, 16th as well as 17th August. Sorry. 16th, the news is from 16th August when the India's premier Jawaharlal Nehru hoisted the flag on the Red Fort, and it was just everyone from all over the country came to Red Fort to see the flag unfurl, and he addressed his citizens, and that that they have to stick together, they have to put an end to communal strife, and that can be only possible when they start trusting each other and looking at each other through citizens of India, and they have to work together uh, uh, towards developing the nation as a community, and not with internal sections. Something similar was said by Jinnah to his when he broadcasted his address to the citizens of Pakistan. It was pretty much it, and he just wanted peace within and without, and within the communities. And he said that it's time that sh- uh, that peace should prevail and communal riots should come to an end, because they have achieved the two nations, and the citizens who even non-Muslim citizens who lived in Pakistan had every right to do so, and they should have a peaceful existence, and everyone should come together irrespective of their religion, and build relations towards a better country. Next slide, please. On 15th and 16th August, the British Army units started leaving India, and on 16th August, the news comes from that two British Army units. One is the um, Inniskilling Fusiliers Regiment Battalion, and the other one was the Royal Norfolk Regiment that they left, and Lord Mountbatten was there to see them off. It was also announced that the Boundary Commission, the award that is the splitting of Punjab and Bengal, that was to be announced today, that was 17th August 1947, and it's only in the 18th August newspaper that I put it that the whole division that is published in a gazette is announced, and yeah, we'll get to that in a while. Can we move forward? Next slide. Yeah. This is also a cartoon from Amrita Bazar Patrika, and here you see this is Lord Mountbatten that has the tricolor in his hands, because he was the Governor General of the Indian Dominion, and he had said, announced to the Indian people that he'll devote himself wholly to the cause of furtherance of India. So that's why there's a tricolor in his hand, and he's wearing something similar to what Nehru wears. Next, yeah. So the Central Cabinet of India that asked the provincial governments to resolve the differences by peaceful methods, and the message was also sent to the to the government in Pakistan also, and it was just all these politicians and the leaders at the same time. They were just saying, this was the daily thing that they were saying, that we have to take measures to resolve differences, and we have to take measures to put an end to communal riots. But we don't really see that happening until Jawaharlal Nehru and Liaquat Ali Khan, they come together, and they come on the issue of Punjab, on the violence that was rampant, and then they form a community of uh, two ministers each from East Punjab as well as West Punjab, and then only after that they give a little bit more leeway to the administrators as well as troops to take care of the situation. Only then we see like a little stemming in terms of the um, in sort of the scope and the scale of violence. Um, uh, on 15th August, Nehru, while unfurling the flag, he had also chalked out a path for and the responsibilities of the citizens of free India, and one was to put an end to internal strife. Of course, that was to forget communalism, and the other one was the equal distribution, because the focus was on production. The focus was on production, and I'm really sorry. Yeah, focus was on. Am I audible? The focus was on production of the country, but he also warned that just the production in fewer hands would just lead to concentration of wealth among a few select individuals, and that was not what he wanted. He was more a follower of socialist principles, and he wanted equitable distribution, and that's what he laid down, that the country had to follow this path of equitable distribution. Even though production was a priority, but even in that, equitable distribution was the characteristic feature that he wanted to highlight. Yeah, can we move on to the next slide, please? So while most of the princely states had accepted the dominion of India, the Nizam of Hyderabad still wanted to be part of the British Commonwealth as an independent princely state. And while he bid goodbye to the resident of the state, C.G. Herbert, he told him that he would still want it, and he still believed that the friendship between Great Britain and Hyderabad would stay, and he would be able to chalk out an independent Hyderabad, who was which was subservient to the British Commonwealth. And yeah, that's what he wanted. And we see in Hyderabad and even Secunderabad, things took a turn for ugly in terms of riots happening and rebellions happening, just because the Nizam wanted to stay independent, and the members of the Congress in Hyderabad, they didn't want that. They wanted to merge with the Dominion of India, and we see in the next 2-3 days that the situation in Hyderabad and Secunderabad turns ugly. Yeah. As the one major that was agreed upon by both the countries was that more troops need to be sent to Punjab to surveil the areas and to patrol the areas, so that the rioters don't have the courage to come out, and even if they do, the troops will take care of them. But even then, the situation during this time, the situation in Lahore as well as Amritsar and Jalandhar turned quite ugly, so ugly that it reached the railway stations, and there was violence in there, and dozens of people lost their lives. And because of that, the trains were suspended between Lahore and Amritsar for that particular period, and it was suspended till the situation was under some sort of control, and that's why the troops were sent there. Yeah, so this is a snap from the celebration of independence. Is from Bombay, where women workers were seen celebrating Independence Day, and there are other snapshots that I wasn't able to include because even this snapshot is like of not great quality, and we could hardly make out anything from the snapshot. But there were others in which children in schools were trying to form lines and make maps of India and celebrate in that fashion. Yeah. Can you move on to the next slide? On the left is Lord and Lady Mountbatten. They were arriving at the Constituent Assembly for the oath taking of the Governor, the Mountbatten, who would now be the Governor General. And on the right side, he's assembling. The right one is from Karachi, where he's addressing the assembly, while Qaid-e-Azam Jinnah is sitting on his side. Yeah. So during 15th August, one thing that both the countries of both governments did was they gave amnesty to prisoners, and lots of prisoners was released depending on they put them in a certain hierarchy, which prisoner would get amnesty first. And in Yerawada, 600 around 600 prisoners were still not given amnesty, and they were on a hunger strike that they should be also released on the eve of independence. And we see in other areas that even perpetrators of communal riots, they were also given amnesty and they were also released. But in Yerawada, apparently 600 prisoners were not, and they were sitting on a hunger strike, so that they are also released. Um, we also see in Banaras a 48-hour curfew was imposed now because Eid was Choti Eid or Eid al-Fitr or Meeti Eid was to be celebrated on 17th or 18th August, and before that the Akhri Jummah or the Jummatul Alwida, the final Friday of the Ramzan, the prayers for that, they were not allowed Muslims who were not Congressy or nationalist. That means this curfew only applied to Muslim leaders, the Muslims uh, who were the followers of the League, or so the curfew only applied to them, and both the administration as well as the local Hindus of the area near the Gyanvapi mosque, they did not want the League Muslims to offer the final prayers, and the curfew was imposed for that. But the curfew was defied by those, and they were trying to offer the prayers still. And on the right is an ad for a book that was published during this period. It was edited by P.D. Tandon, who was a journalist, and it was called Nehru, Your Neighbor, and it was an anthology of his life, and it had chapters from Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore, among others, that just gave an insight into the life of the people's person that Nehru was, and not necessarily as a leader only, but as a common person also. Yeah, can we move on to the next one? Yeah. So finally, the 17th August Boundary Commission Award was announced, and it was only published on the 17th evening, which then in the newspapers was published on 18th August. And on the left hand, you see the map of Punjab with the Muslim and that has demarcation of Hindu and Muslim areas. And so the Lahore went to West Punjab, but there was no agreed solution, as even Cyril Radcliffe says the Boundary Commission did not agree to any solution. They couldn't come to any conclusion, and then Cyril Radcliffe himself and him only chalked out the boundaries of the two countries, and it was his alone the final decision that whatever part went to whatever country. And on the next page we see there's the complete division. Can we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, just commenting on that slide, like a lot of the interviews I've done from my own family who were in Jalandhar, they all say the same thing. They say that it wasn't until 3 days after partition, and that's the timeline, like you say, 17. They're reporting the 18th August newspaper is reporting on the 17th August, and they say that by the 17th they thought Jalandhar was a part of Pakistan, but it was
Yeah.
changed on the 17th.
Yeah. So we see the whole of Jalandhar then goes to Indian side, and Ambala, Amritsar, Gurdaspur, only, and some of the Lahore districts also that were in Lahore, excluding the Lahore city. So only the Lahore city went to Punjab,
Yeah.
went to West Punjab, Pakistan. But the rest of the districts, even Amritsar was a district of Lahore, and it went to the Indian side.
Yeah, and just one more thing, I would like to just give a small anecdote about Gurdaspur. You mentioned Gurdaspur. So one of the interviews I've done for the archive is from a person who was the son of the first and last district commissioner of Gurdaspur. So he became the district commissioner of Pakistani Gurdaspur on the 14th, and by the 17th, I think he was out. So he was the first and last district commissioner of Pakistani Gurdaspur.
That's pretty interesting, actually. Yeah. And Bengal, we see East Bengal, which went to Pakistan. It had the whole of Chittagong, it had Rangpur, it had Rajshahi and the Pabna districts, among others. And West was the Burdwan division and Calcutta, certain districts of Calcutta, and the 24 Parganas and the Murshidabad, Darjeeling, among other districts. even Jalpaiguri and Malda went to the west side of the Bengal. And in Assam, the Sylhet went to East Bengal, and the rest of the Assam was still remained in Hindustan. Only of the province of Assam, only Sylhet went to the East Bengal side. Now, because they were expecting, like you said, that even Amrit, some of the portions that like Jalandhar was expected to be part of Pakistan, but it went to India. So of course the Pakistani ministers were dissatisfied, and they just called it, the exact words that they used was unjust and disgusting, and they solely blamed Cyril Radcliffe for it because the entire boundary commission couldn't come to a decision, and it was only Sir Cyril Radcliffe that went ahead with his own decision, and this was the allotment done by him only. Next page, please. Yeah.
And just another thing on that, the same, like you said, Cyril Radcliffe is blamed by the Punjabis who migrated to West Punjab from East Punjab. And in that same interview, the person, he told a story about his father where he said that he blamed Radcliffe as well. And he was meant to move into the DC house, but the Indian district commissioner who was already there, he wouldn't leave the house. So he thought something was afoot, and he thought there was a conspiracy which the Indian district commissioner was in on, and he said that there was something going on, according to him.
So on this slide we have the map of Bengal, in which you can see they have demarcated the Hindu areas and the Muslim areas, and this was pretty much it. This was the division that was finally taken up by Cyril Radcliffe based on the population areas only, except in Chittagong, because Chittagong had a good population of non-Muslims, mostly tribals. But even then, that went to East Bengal and not the other way around. It was the division did not happen at the micro level, but at the provincial level, and yeah, that's why Chittagong went to East Bengal, which was the part of Pakistan back then, now Bangladesh. Earlier I had mentioned that the first two regiments of the British troops had left, and this is the photo that I found. The Lord Mountbatten was addressing the troops who were leaving, the British troops who were leaving India, and this is a snapshot from that on the right hand. Yeah. Now they finally decided move to restore the peace in Punjab, and like I had mentioned earlier, the decision was to set up a committee of 2 ministers each from West and East Punjab governments, and who would arrange for coordination. What they essentially did was, they asked the local district administration officers as well as troops to coordinate efforts of and give safe passage to refugees. But of course, safe passage wasn't maintained because raids were happening by members of all the communities against the opposite members of communities, and that's why we see still troops, open firing on looting mobs. And this was something that happened till 19th August. And 19th August, we finally see, like, that's the first day that newspapers announced that there was no incident of violence in either Amritsar or Lahore. Can we move on to next slide? Here we see improvement in Lahore and Amritsar situation, and the report is from 17th August, but this was not accurate because we still see even on 18th August that some sort of looting and arson is happening in both sides of Punjab. But in Calcutta, the situation was slightly different. Everyone, members of Muslim and Hindu communities, came together to celebrate the independence of India, and they even, chanted slogans of Hindus and Muslims unite and Jai Hind. And this was raised by mixed crowds. It wasn't Hindus only. It was the crowds who consisted of Hindus and Muslims both. And Calcutta then saw some semblance of non-violence, but we'll still see a few incidents here and there, even in Calcutta, of violence. But overall, the situation had drastically improved. Yeah, can we? Yeah, see. Like I said, there was still incidents of clashes near Calcutta, and people, even like 3 people were killed, and about a dozen injured in clashes. This was near, I think, it's written Bispur police station. Yeah. And in Kanpur, there were still communal riots happening at village levels. And even in Ahmedabad, in Cambay, which is Khambat now, it's in Gujarat, that we see riots happening. So riots hadn't stemmed, and even despite constant and daily appeals by the leaders, that it just didn't translate onto the on-ground situation. The the putting an end to violence calls by leaders just didn't find that much attraction from the people who were indulging in all these areas. And this wasn't just a one-off situation in only Punjab, because mostly it's just most of the narrative around violence is revolved around either Bengal or Punjab, but even in Ahmedabad, central provinces, Hyderabad, the violence was just the entire subcontinent at the time was marred by the violence. Yeah. I only mentioned that point because yesterday I think I saw an article that sort of just blames Punjabis, and on either side, I think it was in Caravan or something, that just says Punjabis need to apologize for the horrors of partition. And yeah, most of the violence did happen in Punjab, but I don't think Punjab should be isolated in just terms of blaming them for violence. It was happening all over. Rehabilitation of refugees. Now 27,000 refugees had flocked from Amritsar to Lahore, and the arrangements were being made for the transfer. And mostly it was just when the Muhajirs, as they were called, they arrived in Lahore, they were sent to Karachi, and they were not really well received by the people of Lahore, and they were just asked to that Pakistan abhi aage aur hai, as in, like, the Pakistan is still, even though they reached Lahore, and they were still asked, like, you haven't reached Pakistan yet, it's further from here, until they reached Karachi, and they saw the sea. And in Calcutta, though, the rehabilitation of refugees under Mr. Gandhi's direction, a novel sort of idea was developed how to rehabilitate refugees. And so he came up with the idea that the people of the majority community, that is Hindus, they should come out in each of the either villages, towns, or any of the residential areas. They should come out and welcome the minorities who were displaced during the clashes and they wanted to come back. So yeah, he asked the majority community, and he himself went there and asked them to come out and just accept the people who were displaced during the riots with open arms, and that kind of worked for Calcutta. This is an appeal by Sir E. Jenkins, who was the last governor of the United Punjab, and he just asked all the Punjabis, irrespective of which part of the country, irrespective of which part that they fall into, either Pakistan or India, that now you are with either, irrespective of the religion, now you are with either Pakistan or India, you should be loyal to the Punjab that you are part of now, and that would really help in taming the communal violence. That's what he thought. Can we move on to the next slide? Yeah. And we also see Rawalpindi getting cut off from pretty much rest of the world at this point for 36 hours, when only the trains from Lala Musa and the Peshawar areas were coming to Rawalpindi, and it was cut off from the rest of India for 36 hours, and no trains were and none of the trains were able to reach Rawalpindi from India, or even outside from Lala Musa or Peshawar. And in Sindh, the government there, in order to give incentive to the minorities to stay in Sindh and not migrate, they reserved 2 seats for minorities in the Sindh cabinet, and they just appealed that if you stay, and we can help build the nation, that is Pakistan, by working together. And that's why in the cabinet there are 2 seats reserved for the minorities. Yeah. like I had mentioned before, that prisoners were released all around during the independence in both the countries. You see it happening in Sindh, you see it happening in central provinces, and you see it happening in Dhulia. It was only just Yerawada that almost that only 600 were left in the jails. Otherwise, rest 1200 were released, and in central provinces we see 13,000 prisoners getting released. And Sindh we see around 161, sorry, not 161 but 170 prisoners, and same for Hulia. We also see the premier of West Punjab, that is Khan of Mamdod. He also came out with the appeal that all out efforts are we should go just all out with our efforts to end the riots. And he said he would give all the power to the local administration and the police to suppress the communal riots and take any harsh action against the perpetrators as they wanted. But of course these people, even, and this was across both the countries, India and Pakistan, that the perpetrators of communal riots were not put in jail for that much while, and they were released like in a couple of days every time. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that wonderful trip to memory lane, Fahad, and very instructive. It gives a new window into partition and how our ancestors who lived through the moment, how they were coping with it, how they were dealing with it. Um, Thank you so much for that. And
Yeah, thank you for having me.
to those, just a second. So yeah, no, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. Do you have any last words? Any how how it puts partition in a certain light?
Yeah, really, because the thing that I found really interesting was because you can't rely on just one newspaper to even study that time period, because every newspaper had their own biases, and it was really enlightening to look at all the newspapers that I had, like 3 4, and in light, and see how much one newspaper was pandering to one community or one dominion. And it was just interesting to see how they were even suppressing news from that were not sort of beneficial to them, or news that would put the community that they are favoring in a bad light. So that was really enlightening.
Yeah, it's very interesting how you said the British newspaper was showing instead of the celebrations, they were showing the darker side of partition, while the Indian and Pakistani newspapers were putting on more celebratory tint on it.
Yeah. Um, Thank you for having me, Azim, and thank you to the Partition Archive for helping me, Debanjan, and Ehsan, develop this timeline series. Um, it was great doing this project.